I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that. As I stood there, a whirlwind of emotions surged within me. It was as if the room had suddenly spiraled into a vivid dream, each face frozen in disbelief, each whisper barely audible yet palpable in its weight. The air crackled with tension as Diane stood behind me, her slight figure momentarily eclipsed by the gravity of revelation. I could feel the anxious buzz of voices around me, each one buzzing like a swarm of angry bees, hovering around the realization that we were not the perfect family my father had painstakingly constructed, but a facade ready to implode. My heart pounded vigorously, a rapid drum signaling my own war drums of vengeance that had finally found their rhythm. "How could you?" someone gasped from somewhere near the back. "I am just as shocked as you are," I wanted to scream, but I held my ground, steadying myself against the flood of emotion. I had no choice, none of us did. My gaze fixated on my father, watching as his face morphed from a confident grin into a mask of horror. It was entirely satisfying, a moment that had been years in the making. "Hey Emma, what do you mean?" a distant cousin called out, confusion etched into her features. "What does she mean, Dad?" I could almost see the gears turning in my father's mind as he desperately tried to regain control of the moment. "This is nonsense." His voice broke through the murmur of confusion, but it was laden with panic. He tried to laugh it off, an uncomfortable, strained chuckle. "We don't need to discuss this right now, do we? This is a family reunion." "A family reunion built on lies," I shot back, my voice gathering strength. I could feel the walls of my resolve solidifying, brick by brick. "Everyone deserves the truth, Samuel. You can't hide from this any longer." Diane shifted slightly behind me, her presence reminiscent of a storm cloud ready to burst. I could sense within her the lingering sorrow of loss and betrayal, nothing more than a casualty of my father's dishonesty. I could not only see it in her eyes but feel it vibrating in the air. With my heart racing like a caged creature, I took a deep breath. "Allow me to explain," I continued, meeting my father's gaze fiercely. "For years you spun this fabric of a perfect family, pretending as if the past never existed. But it does, and it exists in the form of a sister I never had the chance to know." Gasps rose once more, and my father turned a shade paler, his earlier bravado crumbling. I began to pace slightly as I spoke, the energy in the room swirling around me. "Some of you here know Diane. You know her as a neighbor, a friend, but I want you to understand who she really is. The mother of a child you have never been allowed to meet, one who was cast aside because the truth was too hard to handle." A hush fell over the crowd, thickening the air until it felt almost suffocating. A family friend, someone who had always supported Samuel's image, stepped forward, trying to interject. "Emma, maybe we should take a step back. This isn't the place for..." "No." My voice boomed louder than I intended. The surge of adrenaline made me feel alive, emboldened. "This is exactly the place. This is the day for reckoning." And I turned my glare back to my father, who was now starting to visibly tremble. The table near him was strewn with remnants of half-eaten appetizers, the remnants of the happy facade he had tried to maintain. "This is about accountability," I shouted, capturing everyone's attention once more. "Diane, come stand with me." As Diane stepped forward, a collective gasp resonated through the crowd. The fragile woman who had come so far, even if she didn't know it, now stood beside me like a radiant figure before a storm. She raised her chin slightly, her voice soft yet fierce. "I never wanted this to come between families, but the truth is fierce and relentless. Samuel, you know what you did. You left your child, lost in the shadows." The tension in the room escalated. I watched as my father's facade crumbled, his mask slipping away piece by piece. There was rage flickering in his eyes, but also something else, a deep-rooted fear. For too long, he had lived believing he could bury the past and let it die silently, but the truth had grown too powerful, too bold to ignore. "Do you remember those summer nights?" I pressed on, my heart racing with intoxicating fury. "Do you remember how you would tell us stories about your childhood while carefully curating the details of our lives? You always portrayed yourself as the hero, the high achiever who never faltered. But you did falter." My voice echoed through the hall, sounding like a battle cry. I glanced at Diane once again because she was the embodiment of everything I wanted to accomplish. "You ignored your past, you ignored her, Dad. I don't have to listen to this." He shot back, and for a brief moment, the denial in his voice held the same weight as my accusations. "Yes, you do. You have to face the consequences of your actions. Every single one of us here deserves to know the truth." My mind flooded with vivid memories of laughter that didn't reach my heart, of warmth that felt like a distant whisper, of family photos and dinners devoid of truth. "The truth hurt," he muttered, a defensive quiver escaping. "That's why I never told you, Emma." "What's more painful, Dad? The truth or the lies?" I spat back, my voice rising with renewed passion. "You chose to let those lies fester like a wound, infected and waiting to burst. You thought you could control everything with silence, with deceit. But look at us now." The relatives shifted uneasily, glancing between my father and me like spectators at a building storm. I could see their perspectives waver, the initial disbelief beginning to morph into sympathy for the truth I was so eagerly unveiling. "Do you see?" Diane added, her voice steadying as if she were summoning the courage from deep within the soil of secrets. "You thought you could simply erase us from the story, pretend we never existed. My daughter deserved a father who would love her, who would cherish her. It was never about tearing a family apart, it was about healing through honesty." Samuel's hands shook at his sides, and only then did I realize how the empire he had built on lies was starting to unravel around him. "Enough. This is absurd," he bellowed, desperation pouring from his voice. The confidence he had wrapped himself in was slowly unwrapping, revealing the man beneath the flawed facade, a man who was unprepared for the truth he had tried to bury. "No, Samuel, it is only just beginning," my words sliced through the tension. "You can deny it all you want, but Diane deserves to be recognized. My sister deserves to be remembered. You took that away from her. You took it all away." The crowd started murmuring louder, voices blending into a chaotic backdrop of disbelief. Many began to abandon the pretense of civility. I could see relatives shifting uncomfortably, others whispering among themselves, my father's facade cracking wider with every biting word. "Hear me." I raised my voice intentionally, commanding their attention like an angry conductor directing a symphony of truths. "This is not merely about one girl. This is about your false reality, and it's about time you all wake up. This family isn't perfect. Let us acknowledge the shadows we've created instead of pretending they don't exist." A few seconds of silence followed, thick and suffocating, almost like the world had paused to absorb the waves of shocking revelations. In that moment, I saw a glimpse of vulnerability flicker across my father's face, a furrowed brow and shaking hands, raw and unpolished without the gleaming veneer of falsehood. I was conscious of Diane standing strong beside me, her gaze unwavering as she faced the crowd. "Stop hiding behind your shame, Samuel," I shouted desperately, anger morphing into raw energy that coursed through me. "You must face what you've done. Let us mend this wound rather than let it fester any longer." The atmosphere shifted with unspoken understanding. Heads were nodding, whispers of agreement drifted through the hall like a fresh breeze after a storm. I could see it, the slow, palpable acceptance, the emerging support from those who had longed for truth yet had never dared to seek it. And amidst that chaos, I stood resolute. I felt empowered, the very air surrounding me vibrant with potential. As Diane and I shared a glance of unsaid promises, I realized it was no longer just my battle. We would stand together, two brave souls ready to obliterate the veil of silence and usher in the dawn of truth, together forcing my father to confront the reality he had tried to escape. With one heartbeat pulsing in unison, I led the way into a future of liberation. For a brief instant, stunned silence took hold of the room. Every guest wore a mask of shock, mouths agape. The silence felt almost electric, crackling with an unspoken energy, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. Time hung in a delicate balance, teetering at the edge of a precipice. The plush carpet beneath my feet felt oddly grounding, as if it anchored me to reality amidst the chaotic storm brewing in everyone else's minds. The opulent decorations around us, the silk drapes, the glittering chandeliers, the lavish table settings, seemed starkly out of place against the atmosphere of betrayal hanging heavy in the air. Then the chaos erupted around us. Whispers grew like wildfire, disbelief fluttered from one corner of the room to another, igniting fires of fury and accusations. I could hear snippets of hushed voices, frantic questions, and the clattering of plates being abandoned on tables as guests realized the enormity of what they had just witnessed. Tickled by the satisfaction of finally unearthing the truth, I stood firm, my hands balled into fists at my sides, feeling the surge of adrenaline coursing through me. My father seemed to shrink before our very eyes, his 6-foot stature collapsing into a mere shadow of the man he once was. The once commanding presence, the powerful aura he wrapped himself in, was evaporating like mist in the morning sun. With every judgmental stare directed at him, I could see his confidence crumble. My Aunt Cynthia, his sister, stepped forward, her hands trembling with indignation. Her face flushed, and she looked almost unrecognizable in her fury. "How could you do this, Samuel? Your children deserve to know the truth," she shouted, her voice cracking under the pressure of her emotions. It was as if her words were daggers, cutting through the tension in the air and striking him where it hurt most. Eyes were now fixated on him, and every glance felt like a weight adding to his burden. This was the reckoning he had tried so desperately to avoid, and I was witnessing the fall of a patriarch. My heart raced as I cast a glance at Diane. She stood beside me, bravely facing the storm swirling around us. Her vibrant dress seemed to shimmer with strength, even as her gaze bore into my father's soul like an arrow finding its mark. "Your lies cost my daughter her life," she spoke, her voice steadying with every word. It was a declaration, a powerful statement that demanded acknowledgement. "You claimed to love her, but where was that love when it mattered most?" Her accusation hung in the air like a dark cloud, and the room grew thick with tension. Conversations broke into heated arguments, family members turned against each other as they processed what had just happened. Some felt anger while others wore looks of disbelief. My cousin, who had always idolized my father, shook his head in denial. "You can't be serious. He wouldn't do that," he urged, glancing nervously at my father as if waiting for him to defend himself. The chaos around me morphed into a fractal of human emotion, a web of tears, accusations, and shouts that echoed against the lavish walls. I felt exhilarated, riding on waves of vindication. The knot of helplessness that had coiled within me for years was finally unraveling inch by inch. My heart swelled with the knowledge that I was no longer a child blinded by a web of deception, but a force of nature. I was standing for something bigger than myself. I was standing for Lily, a name that now hung like an ominous specter in the air. My father, whose face was now marred with shades of humiliation, could barely look at me. His eyes flickered between rage and disbelief, going dark as they searched for excuses that he could no longer conjure to shield himself from the truth. I had stripped him of that armor. "You don't understand," he yelled suddenly, his voice trembling as the frantic energy enveloping him bled into his tone. "It wasn't what you think, it was for your own good." The desperate plea was met with outright scoffs and jeers. Family members were losing faith in him by the second. As chaos erupted around us, Clara stood near me, tears streaming down her face. Her expression reflected a mix of shock and sorrow, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt engulfing my heart. I longed to comfort her but found my own emotions too tangled up in joy and revenge to reach out. Clara placed her hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me amid the turbulence. The warmth of her hand was a reminder that while this moment was splintering our family, it was also forging connections anew. "I never thought," she began, her voice trembling but earnest. "I never thought it would come to this." The truth had cut through us all like a knife, exposing the fragile threads holding our family together. I could see a mixture of disbelief and fury etched on many faces, the realization dawning at different depths for each person. There would be no more silence. Everything hidden had come to light, and it felt liberating. The tension that had choked our family gatherings for years burst free like steam escaping a boiling kettle. Every gasp of shock, every distant murmured accusation cemented my resolve. My father's faltering figure, shrinking into himself, became a symbol of my success. I met my father's gaze, the defiance that once fled had now returned multiplied. His eyes filled with rage as our stares clashed, creating an electric barrier of animosity. "You were supposed to protect us," I accused him, my words carrying the weight of years wrapped in a single moment, each syllable more powerful than the last. "But all you did was destroy everything we believed in." In response, he opened his mouth, poised to respond but failing to produce a sound. A chorus of murmurs interrupted his silence, the voices climbing in volume, often contradicting one another, but all of them enveloping him in an uneasy cacophony. My father seemed to shrink even further as more and more relatives turned away from him, their loyalties shifting, unmoored by the revelation. "Emma, please just listen to me," he finally cried, sounding almost like a desperate child, his voice cracking. "You don't understand the whole story?" But it was too late for stories. It was too late for explanations. I could see it in the faces of my family. They no longer wanted to hear his excuses. My own heart softened a fraction at his plea, but I quickly steeled myself. "You should have thought of that before you destroyed lives," I shouted back. And with that, the crowd responded with a roar of agreement, their indignation washing over me like tidal waves. I could almost sense my father's internal dissonance, caught between his defensive instincts and the undeniable truth erupting around him. Each accusation hurled at him felt justified, a cathartic release for the myriad of wounds he had inflicted over the years. It was no longer about me. It was about justice for Lily, for the pain my family had endured, all woven through the intricate tapestry of our shared lives. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the room as a glass was knocked off a table, shattering on the polished floor. The noise jolted the gathering, causing heads to jerk around in alarm. Tension hung thick, binding us together in a collective moment of suspension. The turmoil arose anew as people gossiped about whose fault it had been, irritation and fight returning to their gazes. In contrast, Diane's expression remained firm, her eyes unwavering on my father. It was a banner of solidarity that made me realize the weight of our actions as a united front. A wave of sympathy for Diane swept through me, realizing how deeply this mattered for her. "You all know what he did to her," she implored the crowd, her voice gaining volume with every word. "You can feel the lies that have haunted our family like shadows in the night. He may stand tall today, but it is a hollow man." The strength of her words pulled everyone back into focus. The room fell silent again, now laced with determination rather than disbelief. I took a step forward, emboldened, needing more than an exchange of jabs with my father. "We needed you to be honest so we could heal," I pressed on, my heart pounding audibly in my ears. But your lies turned our love into resentment, into nightmares. You have no idea how many sleepless nights we have suffered because of you." My own voice echoed as I concluded, drawing in a breath. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, waiting for my father to respond, waiting for anything that could barely scratch the surface of what he owed us. Amid the brewing storm, I felt Clara's grip tight on my shoulder, her empathy lending me strength. People started to nod, acknowledgement rippling through the guests. It was a subtle yet profound shift. Those fragile threads of family that had been tugged and frayed now began to weave together, forged by the true tales we uncovered. It was evident to me that people were beginning to realize the vast rift between us had not only emerged from my father's actions, but from years of silence that had festered and grown. My father's lips moved, but no words escaped. Chaos erupted once more, a maelstrom of emotion as guests confronted him, accusations flying like arrows in a battle. It felt as if an invisible dam had burst, releasing torrents of anguish and fury that had been suppressed for far too long. Eyes widened in disbelief, old grudges were reignited, and here we were, confronting a legacy of hurt that my father's lies had birthed. I glanced back at Diane, who was shaking her head slowly, or perhaps in disbelief or resignation. It was hard to tell. Clara squeezed my shoulder tighter, her presence echoing my own emotions, defiance, loss, and an overwhelming longing for closure. A small part of me reflected on what would happen after this moment. Would he still be our father, or had that version of him been irreparably lost to the abyss of his own deception? The fragile barrier of our family, so painstakingly crafted over years, was crumbling like a castle of sand beneath relentless waves. As the din filled the room, I realized this storm was only the beginning of a reckoning. In this cacophony, I was no longer a child seeking revenge. I was chasing justice, a reckoning that had been long overdue. The tension in the air crackled like a live wire as I stood amidst the chaotic swirl of emotions, where betrayal hung over us like an ominous cloud. The reunion, which should have been a joyful celebration of family, had turned into something far darker. I could see Samuel retreating further into the shadows, his face a mask of shame and regret as the weight of his past bore down on him with relentless pressure. Each piercing accusation aimed at him struck the air around us like arrows, and I couldn't help but feel the exhilaration blooming within me. I had planned this moment meticulously, driven by a desire for revenge that had simmered beneath my calm exterior for far too long. As I peered through the dim lighting of the living room, I marveled at my relatives peeling away the layers of denial. Each voice rose in passionate protest, unmasking their own wounds and confusion. "How could you do this, Dad?" The words came from one of my cousins, a young woman whose bright smile had once lit up many family gatherings. Her voice trembled but stood strong, backed by a crowd of accusatory eyes that had once adored him. The expressions shifted from disbelief to anger, creating a ripple of sympathy for Diane, clearly grappling to process the torment that had been kept hidden. "You even recognize what your lies took from us?" Another relative echoed, their voice cracking as they gestured towards Diane. "A father's love is supposed to be unconditional, but you have filled that space with betrayal." Each word was like a thunderclap, loud enough to silence the fleeting laughter that had once felt safe and warm, now replaced by uncertainty and despair. I didn't know how," Samuel muttered, his fingers fidgeting nervously, the guilt etching shadows into his pale face. I could sense the way he wanted to defend himself, but the words stumbled as if the truth had become a locked door that he could no longer open. I felt a surge of satisfaction. He deserved this reckoning for the pain he inflicted, the secrets he hoarded like gold while we struggled in the dark. Standing side by side with Diane, I sensed layers of pain and relief intertwining within her, a tumultuous cocktail of emotions. "This is my chance to finally understand," she whispered so softly, her voice barely louder than the whispers encircling us like ghosts. A tear slid down her cheek, but it wasn't just sadness. It was as if the water was breaking, releasing a flood of years held back by chains. "Diane," I said gently, placing a hand on her arm, "you are not alone. Look at them, they stand with you now." I gestured at the family members stretching their hands forward, offering not just comfort to her but solidarity. The atmosphere shifted subtly. Where blame once reigned, there was now a budding determination to lift each other up. Diane turned her gaze toward the support filling those spaces. I saw the weight of years evaporating from her shoulders, even if only slightly. The sounds of confrontation were a constant hum, wrapping around us like a protective barrier. I felt the electric thrill of triumph coursing through my veins. I had to expose him, I thought, my heart racing as I witnessed what I had long envisioned. Each revelation ignited flames of hope. Those birthmarks of betrayal that had adorned our family were now blurred in the face of healing. "Do you really expect us to forgive you, Dad?" Alex's voice sliced through the noise, a mixture of anguish and anger tinged with an unsuspecting resolve. I glanced at him. He stood beside me, a pillar, his eyes shimmering with newfound clarity. You were always the one we looked up to. I thought you were perfect, but now," he swallowed hard, "now I just feel lost." "My son, please." Samuel's voice was desperate, trembling with vulnerability. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought—" His sentence faltered, drowned out by the chorus of discontent. "Thought what? That lies were better than the truth," Alex countered, his jaw clenched as he folded his arms across his chest, positioning himself as a stronger version of the boy who had idolized our father. I watched him grow before my eyes as anger sparked into a fierce determination to define his own truth apart from the man who had hidden behind a facade for far too long. The conversations around us echoed my feelings, sentiments rolling from our family like waves against a fragile shore. I heard my mother's sobs rise, weaving between the shouts like a haunting melody, her tears, a mixture of grief and liberation, carving out paths on her cheeks. When she turned to me, those glistening eyes held not just sorrow but the dawning light of understanding. "You did this, Emma. You kept us safe. By putting him on trial, you freed us," she whispered, pulling me into a tight embrace. I could hardly breathe, the warmth of her love enveloping me even amidst the chaos unfolding. I felt the bittersweet weight of her gratitude, the sorrow that dissolved into relief. "Mom," I murmured, yearning for her to recognize the swirling emotions within me. It was never just about revenge. It was about letting truths take their rightful place in our hearts again. Even in her presence, I could feel the collective breaths of my family, gasping at the rawness of the moment, the full and ugly truth now laid bare. In these small seconds, hope shimmered. As the evening wore on, the room shifted from chaotic eruptions to quieter conversations, an unusual balance settling over us. It was as if the collective release breathed life into fragile moments where laughter once reigned supreme. Now it was a slow, cautious thing, threading through our uncertain atmosphere, gradually warming it as families reconciled their insecurities. Something beautiful emanated from the wreckage, the understanding that we were no longer tied to the lies that had birthed resentment. Rather, collectively, we were beginning to stitch together a new narrative, one tethered to honesty. It was a fragile thread, but it was there, and for the first time I felt a tether to hope rise up inside me. I caught Alex's eye again, and in that fleeting moment, a wordless exchange ignited between us. Respect, understanding, and an unspoken promise that from here on out we would forge our path uncompromised by deceit. "You fought for us," he said quietly, barely audible above the soft conversations of other family members gathering around. I smiled back at him, feeling empowered. "No more secrets, right?" He nodded, his face set into a determined expression. We would weather any storm together, bonded not just by blood but by this newfound commitment to living the truth. The essence of our family had shifted. The fire that had threatened to consume us all became a beacon, illuminating the darkness that lingered. "Do you think he realizes the gravity of what he has lost?" I pondered aloud, casting a glance over at Samuel, who stood alone in a corner, watching the family he had betrayed. There was no longer love in their eyes, only the clarity of understanding. Each person had unmasked their pasts to break the chains he had long held over us. "Maybe he doesn't deserve to," Alex replied bitterly, but his voice softened. "But it doesn't matter. We have each other now." Those simple words settled in the air like warm sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The evening was fading fast, shadows stretching across the room, yet the atmosphere had shifted with every heartbeat. A collective resolve began to anchor itself among the family, like grains of sand washing ashore, gathering strength in their unity. As we took those first cautious steps into a brighter dawn, I felt an undeniable surge through me, the sweet rush of liberation mingling with the fresh promise of beginnings untainted by old pain. Samuel may have lost the admiration of the family he had crafted through lies, but in that sweeping emotional turmoil, I found myself liberated. I had transformed my thirst for revenge into a harvesting of hope, reclaiming our narrative from his shadows, and in turn I realized it was never just about him. I was ready to embrace the future laid out before us, a future where we would hold hands, steadfast against the winds of our past, empowered to face whatever awaited us on the horizon. It was a new beginning, and I welcomed every moment of it, heart wide open to all that was to come.